Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today for our second in a series of 3 webinars on the topic of AI in NetSuite. So today we're talking about AI directions and seeing them in action, walking through some real-life invoice processing scenarios in NetSuite and showing how you can improve those processes for yourselves. Today, I'll be emceeing our session. My name is Matt Nelson. I manage our customer success team here at Charted. Been with the company for just coming up on 9 years now. And I'll turn things over to Mike for an intro.
Yeah, my name is Mike Johnson. If you were not able to attend our first session, I am one of the product managers here at Charted. I'm focused on a couple of our different software solutions, including Invoice AI.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. So to get started, just a quick review of our agenda today. So we'll touch on a quick recap of our first session in this webinar series. We'll talk about, well, what is an AI direction? What do we mean when we say that? We'll talk through a couple of short scenarios, examples. We'll both talk to them, and then we'll jump into a live demo inside of NetSuite for that. And then we'll wrap up with some question and answer sessions.
If you aren't able to attend our first session, I think we're actually going to drop a link to that and you can go back and watch a recording. But to just give you a quick recap of what were some of the highlights and some of the key takeaways that we had in our first session, the first thing that we really highlighted was making sure that you're measuring what matters. We put an emphasis on making sure you're measuring the amount of invoices that come in the system that are able to be processed without your team really needing to intervene, that touchless rate. We talked about the value of making sure that you had a system that could learn with your business. We highlighted some of the tools that Charted has built to handle some of the different learning scenarios that could come up, whether that's learning that needs to happen inside of NetSuite based off of historical data, AI directions, and even some of the auto learning that we have built in. And we highlighted how important it is to stay NetSuite native, right? To have that one system, that one source of truth that your team is already working in. Today, we're going to focus on AI directions. This was something that's always of interest to our customers and our prospects. How can we leverage this technology? So we're going to be looking at a couple different use cases and kind of walk through them here today. So I'll turn it back over to Matt and give us a little bit of an intro into what AI directions really are.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. So you're probably all asking yourselves, what is an AI direction? And this is something that we built into our Invoice AI tool to really facilitate putting power back in your hands. So at a high level, an AI direction is what it says on the screen here, a natural language instruction that allows you to tell Invoice AI how to read your invoices. You can use natural written language in your own words. You don't need to, go into some kind of IT technical speak when you're writing these instructions. They can be very targeted. So if you really just need to address a given vendor's invoices differently from everyone else's, we can do that. Or an AI direction can be targeted at all invoices coming in, so it really can apply globally. And the goal here is to make it a bit more self-service. We can allow given users, individuals, permission to create these AI directions, so really you don't need to go to your IT team or your support team to get this done. As you know, every invoice that you get is just a little bit different. And we're really putting the power back in your hands to allow NetSuite to handle all those little variances for you. If you have Invoice AI, you're probably, noticing these exceptions you're handling manually, invoices from foreign vendors, weird tweaks or custom coding you have to do, custom fields that are native to you, or sorry, not native, custom to your environment and not native to NetSuite. Really AI directions are built for those situations. So let's maybe start from a high level with a quick polling question. So how often does your AP team have to deal with invoices, maybe in a foreign language? Are we looking at rarely, less than 5% of your invoices come in a language that you're not using yourself in NetSuite? Sometimes, maybe up to a quarter of them, pretty frequently, or, all the time. How frequently are you dealing with those different languages? Give everyone a moment to participate in the poll. All right. It looks like For most of us, it's rarely. It's less than 5% of the time. But we do have a good number of participants here that, are seeing that maybe up to 25 or even up to 50% of your invoices are coming in other languages. A high-level look at a first scenario that we'll cover here, and then we'll look at live inside of NetSuite. So those foreign language invoices. As an example, maybe you have a vendor in France. They're sending you their invoices in French. So how are you processing those today? We've heard from our customers that, historically they've maybe run that through Google Translate, or they send it back to the vendor and say, hey, can you send us an English version? Or maybe they've just gotten in the habit of, well, I know the name of the vendor and I know I need to code it this way. Or maybe even we're just getting into NetSuite and then coming back and recoding and working on it later. But either way, all of those result in delays, miscoding, potential errors.
Yeah, so this is a great opportunity for AI directions to help solve that use case. So with a simple AI direction, we can actually take that description or a piece of that invoice that potentially came in a different language, and we can have it translated leveraging AI to whatever language that your business operates in. The nice thing about this is it can be scoped to just a particular vendor. So it doesn't have to affect other invoices and the way that you're processing things that aren't relevant to this use case. But can be targeted to those vendors that this would be applicable to. And as we saw in that polling question, right, this might not be the majority of your invoices, right? This is just a small percentage of your invoices, but how can we help make sure that those aren't slowing down your AP process? Another thing to highlight with AI directions in these use cases is the fact that this doesn't just apply to English, right? This can work in whatever language your business may be operating in. There are certain languages that are going to have higher confidence in just because of the fact of what AI understands, but this can virtually apply to any language that your business is going to be operating. And we'll dive into a little bit more details on some of these use cases when we get into the demo, but I'll turn back over to Matt to just talk about our next scenario.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. As we said, maybe the foreign languages aren't really a good example for the situations you're dealing with. So what about smart coding from that invoice data? The information you need to code properly inside of NetSuite is present on that PDF, but you're still coding it manually. So as an example, maybe your location is actually printed on every invoice line on that PDF, but your team is still, having to manually enter that one value in that same field every month. So it is a repetitive type process, and we really want to take away those repetitive tasks and allow your team to focus on more value add type activities.
And again, this is another great opportunity for AI directions solving that. If the data point exists, if something on the invoice itself can tell you how to code the invoice, there's probably an AI direction for it. So we can actually target an AI direction specifically at, this is how I figure out what the location is. We can map that to a custom body, column, or standard field. It's written in clear language, as you can see from this example on the screen, right? This isn't, scripting or coding that I'm having to write. It's natural language instruction that I'm able to provide to Invoice AI to help it understand what it needs to find on that invoice and how that's going to help it determine the location that should be selected. So once this is set up, the problem is solved, and you can get back to just processing your invoices and let Invoice AI handle the rest.
What about other scenarios? It's very likely that you have invoices that do require some unique or exception-based coding. So how often does that come up where you have that kind of unique instance where you need to have the AI extractor do something different? Looking again, less than 5% of the time, up to 25%, up to 50%, or pretty frequently you have these exception-based coding examples. Give everyone a moment to fill in their answers in the poll. Okay, excellent. It looks like this one is a much more common scenario than maybe a foreign language invoice. It looks like probably the majority of people are dealing with this on a daily, if not hourly basis. So what can we do about that for you? Here's an example where we can auto-populate some of those custom fields for you. Every custom field you have in NetSuite, if you're having scenarios where those custom fields are still blank after the AI runs, after it extracts that information and your team has to fill it in by hand, we can probably handle a lot of those scenarios with an AI direction here. So instead of having your team have to go back in and manually populate things like meter numbers or account IDs from utility bills, we can really address that with these AI directions, especially if that information is in some format on the invoice record, on that PDF.
And this is really, as Matt said, a little bit of a variation of the last solution or the last problem that we went through here. If that piece of data exists on the invoice, an AI direction can typically be used to get it off of the invoice and get it into the field that you want it. So in the last case, it was kind of like a coding piece of information. We were using something on the invoice to specify a location that needed to be selected inside of NetSuite. In this case, we're saying, hey, there's like a piece of text, right? That's important to my business. Maybe I want that for reporting purposes or for something else like that. We could leverage an AI direction to make sure that we copy those pieces of information. Meter number is an example I've run into with talking with our customers. They had a lot of different invoices they would receive from a utility company. Keeping track of those was very cumbersome, and they wanted to make sure that they could get that data point into NetSuite to be able to use it down the line for reporting purposes. So this is the last scenario. We're going to walk through each one of these in a little bit more detail. Make sure you kind of understand how these are set up, how they look inside the system, and how they could, again, these are just 3 examples. There's lots of examples out there, but hopefully this gives you some ideas, gets the wheels spinning in your brain of how these things could help your business. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to my demo environment of NetSuite. Again, as a recap of something that we covered last solution and something that you should know about if you've talked to Charted at all. We are NetSuite native. It is something that we think is a really big deal and really important to our product, that you have kind of one system that your users are operating in and one source of truth. So with our Suite app, you have the ability to control roles and permissions of who can access different things. One of the things that you can actually control who can access is AI directions, like Matt said earlier. So we can grant this permission to, obviously NetSuite administrators can have this permission, but you can grant it to other users and roles in your organization so they can kind of manage this process themselves. What I would do if I want to go ahead and create a direction is actually just go into our settings, again, assuming that I have appropriate permission, and I'm going to see this AI directions option in my sidebar. And you can see in this demo account, I've created, multiple different kinds of AI directions for, different things. We'll focus on these top 3. These map to the scenarios that we covered in our introductory to this session. So we'll go ahead and start with the first one first, which was that translation example. So in the translation example here, you can see how I provided just a description name. This is truly just descriptive. This is just to help you find it in the list of directions if you were to go back to it. You can provide what we call identifying keywords. This is how we can target those AI directions, right? We brought up that this translation use case might not be applicable to all of your vendors, but it could be applicable to 1 or 2 of your vendors. And this is how you can limit how those directions are applied. So some common keywords, there are some ideas for how you can come up with keywords, are things like account numbers, right? That could be unique to a particular vendor and help make sure that that direction only applies when we see that particular account number, or a VAT number, EIN number, or some sort of other business identifier. Those can all be helpful identifying keywords. Sometimes you do want directions to apply more broadly. I have come across use cases where people say something like, I want a direction to apply anytime you see the word service period or service date. And you can use those for directions too. It just really depends on what you're trying to do with the direction. If you need it to apply more broadly, or you do want it to apply to a specific exception or use case. At the top, you'll see the ability to provide like kind of general context to AI. In most use cases, this won't be necessary when you're creating directions. You're mostly going to focus on what we call custom extraction, field extraction directions here at the bottom. And this is where you can provide that additional context of a particular data point, what we want to get from the invoice itself. So the first part of the direction is going to be where it needs to go inside of NetSuite. So we can see that I'm wanting this to affect the description, what's extracted as the description inside of NetSuite. And then the second part is what I want AI to actually do. So this was a very simple direction that I wrote where I just told it that, hey, that description that's on the invoice, I want you to actually translate it to English when you're reviewing the information, determining what the description is. Go ahead and translate that back into English for me. So yeah, just a simple example to walk through our first use case there. We'll go ahead and review our other directions before we go ahead and upload these in the demo account here. So the second one that we walked through is just that direction of how do we set up something to affect the location. Same thing up above, I provided a description name, I provided a keyword, because in this case, I was just targeting at a particular vendor. At the bottom here, you can see how I wrote that extraction direction for the location. Now, something to know about AI directions, they are focused on getting text off of the invoice, right? So we don't typically want to build logic into directions. We want to help AI figure out what is it on the invoice that affects the piece of information that I'm asking you to determine, right? So in this case, I told it to look for that service location column that shows up on the invoice. And you can also see that I provided it an example of what it was going to look like. This isn't always required, but it can help AI determine what on the invoice you're truly looking for and what the format you expect it to come back in. So that's just another tip that you can keep in the back of your mind when you're working with AI directions. I don't always do it, but a lot of times I like to put an example in there so that it's able to figure out the pattern that I'm looking for. Last direction that we'll go ahead and look at is that example or the direction of how do we get the meter number. So here's my custom field extraction that I wrote for this particular example. You can see that this one is a custom body field that I'm targeting. And again, this is a dropdown, right? So you can see lots of different fields that are available for me to select. This is going to be different on an account by account basis, right? Because it's going to depend on which accounts are available in your instance of NetSuite. But this is how you're going to control where we're actually populating that data that we got off the invoice. My direction here is still very targeted at what is it on the invoice that I'm looking for. So I told it that I wanted to find the meter number, and it's listed under a meter number label, right? So AI directions can understand the relative placement of things that might exist on an invoice. So it's really helpful to tag it to like a keyword that might exist, or you can give relative placement. I've written directions where I tell it, hey, it's going to exist in the upper left-hand or upper right-hand corner of the page. Those can be helpful for making sure that a direction is able to understand what it's looking for on the page. Something else to highlight here while we're on the page is you don't have to just have a separate direction for different fields. So in this case, for this particular vendor, if I wanted to have different fields or different things populated, I could absolutely do that, right? So maybe we'll try one here on the fly. Let's say I also on this particular meter number example, right, for my utility vendor, when it sees the meter number keyword, I also wanted to populate the memo with the month. Let's tell it to concatenate the month, year, and utility type of this invoice. Example, let's say, May 2025 power bill. And this is another reason why examples can be helpful, because in this case, if I just left it with something like concatenate the month, year, and type of utility invoice, that gives AI a lot of opportunities to figure out how it wants to bring those details together. So providing an example here, it just gives it some structure to say, this is how I expect you to bring those details together. So we'll go ahead and try that. I haven't previewed this particular AI direction before, so we'll be doing a little bit of real live testing on the demo here today. So after I've updated those directions or created those directions, I'm going to go ahead and jump back to our homepage here and jump into our inbox. If you're not familiar with our product, our AP inbox is really the starting point for all invoices that come into the system. So they can come in through a couple different ways, either through email. So if you have vendors sending you invoices with emails attached, those can flow directly into NetSuite and drop into this inbox for you. You also have the option just to drag and drop files in. So I have my sample files on my computer here. I'm just going to go ahead and drag those into the system. You will see that they'll be uploaded, they'll be scanned in real time, and will be ready for processing in just a handful of seconds here. While that's scanning, we'll just go ahead and highlight a couple other things that are available within our inbox. So you can see high-level information about what's extracted off of the invoice when the extraction process finishes. So you can see things like what was the vendor that was determined, what subsidiary is going to be assigned. We do have the ability to support multiple subsidiaries if you are a larger organization, invoice numbers, dates, amounts. You even have the ability to perform actions, right? So if something comes in and you don't need to process it for whatever reason, you can easily remove that or update certain fields, right? So if the subsidiary gets misassigned or you have multiple users and you're assigning what we call ownership, right? So that AP professional that's responsible for processing different items, you can easily update those things directly from the inbox. Those data points typically tie into some of our filters too. So I right now have the inbox filtered down to just things that I'm assigned to as owner. If you're a large organization, that can be helpful, right? So it keeps clutter out of my screen. Let's say Matt and I are both AP professionals. We're both working in the inbox. I probably don't need to look at things that Matt's assigned to, and I just want to stay focused on things that I'm assigned to. And that's one way that you can help separate those duties and keep on task with what you're responsible for. Once the items or the invoices are finished scanning, you can see, again, all of that data extracted and is available for processing. So let's go ahead and walk through all of these and process these here in our demo. So I'll start with the first one here in the order of just how these scanned and got extracted. So this is actually I think this was our last example that we went through, and it was focused on that example of getting the meter number extracted off the invoice. So clicking into the item is going to take you into our split screen view. You can see the invoice on the left side of the screen, and on the right side of the screen, you're going to see your standard NetSuite vendor bill form. So however that's been set up in your NetSuite account, you're going to be able to see that right here. We can see that the direction that I had focused on meter number, it was able to find that meter number under that meter number tag. If you remember, that was part of my direction. I kind of gave it some natural language, right? It wasn't scripting, but I tied it and told it, hey, I want you to look for this kind of value. And something that can help you find that value is that meter number word or tag that is going to exist on this particular invoice. So it was able to capture that, and it was able to bring that into my custom field that I have in my vendor bill record here and populate that. So that could be helpful, again, because this is now in a field inside of NetSuite as I go to run reports, right? Save searches, because we're inside of NetSuite, integrated inside of NetSuite. If I want to now pull that custom field into a report or a dashboard or something like that, it's easy to do that. And Invoice AI was able to tie into that standard NetSuite functionality. We can also see how I wrote that one on the fly here to say, hey, let's also maybe come up with a memo. I want some sort of memo that has the date, the month that the invoice was for, the year that the invoice was for, and then whatever the utility type was. So I wrote that on the fly here. It was able to parse out that this was for April 2026. It got those details, pulled that into my memo field, and then did let me know that it was a power bill. And again, got that power bill language because that's kind of the example that I gave it. If you wanted this to be a little bit more formal and say that this was your electric service or whatever, or even, again, maybe you want that meter number to be brought into the memo field as well, you could pull all those details in. So if everything else looks good, again, it pulled in the line level descriptions for me, it coded it. All of this coding information kind of ties back into our last session where that's being done by looking at historical bills in the system, saying, hey, how have utility bills for this vendor been coded in the past? And it brought those details in. If all of that looks good, I can go ahead and just save this bill. If I'm going to be processing multiple invoices in a row, something else you can leverage inside of our inbox is actually our save and next functionality. So I'm actually going to do that. What this is going to do is it's going to go ahead and save this bill and take me directly to the next one in the queue, which is one of our other examples that we need to look at. So this is actually our foreign language example where I told it, I want you to find that description that exists on the invoice. I want you to pull that out, but instead of bringing that in the language that existed on the invoice, I want you to translate it to English for me. Matt kind of highlighted some of the pain points that can exist around if you did receive a foreign language invoice, maybe there is someone on your team that can speak that language and that's okay. But let's talk about, again, reporting, right? What if you want everything, all of your memos standardized into English if you can, so that when you run general ledger reports or other saved searches inside of NetSuite, it's more accessible to your broad audience and your business as a whole. So it's never going to actually translate the invoice itself, right? That's not going to be touched by our solution. That's still going to remain whatever your vendor sent you. But inside of NetSuite, we can handle that translation so that whatever the French equivalent can be translated in English, leveraging AI, and give you some sort of standardized view for those memos. Again, same sort of example here. If everything looks good, I can quickly go ahead and save that invoice and move on to the next one that's in the inbox here. So this was an invoice. This was that example of how can we affect some coding information based off of details that are on the invoice. In our last session, we talked about how we can help code invoices based on historical bills that might be in the system. So you could have instances where your vendor's not going to tell you this is the location that we serviced, right? And in that case, you can fall back to that kind of machine learning where we look at historical bills and we try to determine the coding details based on some detail like that. But if there is a detail where the vendor is going to let you know something, hey, this is the service location that we provided, right? So this example was set up with some sort of facility maintenance company. They're helping out on multiple different warehouses that you have across the United States. And they probably need to tell you, hey, this is where those particular services were performed, but they're invoicing you in a consolidated format. Well, what we did is we wrote that direction, if you remember, and we said, hey, this is what we want you to, Invoice AI, we need you to get that description, the service location off of the invoice, because that's going to help you determine what the location is. And you can see in this example, it was able to get these service locations off of the invoice, and it was able to map those two locations. Now, what it actually does behind the scenes, our directions are always going to be pointed at the text that helps us figure out the detail that we need to populate, right? So my direction was focused on finding the service location on the invoice itself. Once we determine that a location, Invoice AI is able to then associate, hey, if I see Nashville, Tennessee, Warehouse 1, I want you to select the Nashville location, right? So it's able to learn that behavior with time. So I kind of made an example here of this particular invoice that we're scanning. This Houston location at the bottom is actually not something that it's seen before. So it didn't know how to code that and it left it blank. This is the first time, maybe that's a new warehouse for me. So it hadn't seen what location to associate. So in that case, if it's a new location, you can pick the right one. I think I added my Houston. Maybe I forgot to add my Houston location. Apologies. So we'll just pretend it's this site 4A. That's my my Houston, Texas warehouse that I'm planning to use. You can go ahead and associate that. And then what Invoice AI is going to be able to do going forward is saying, okay, in the service location, if I see this text, that's what you actually want me to select. And going forward, it will be able to populate those coding details for you. So this is just a couple use cases that AI directions can help you with in coding and bringing those invoices into NetSuite, into the fields and the data points that you need. After you save the bill, we don't have to stop the automation here. So our invoice automation solution and the other products that we offer can deliver a lot more value to your organization. We can handle approvals. So from here, I could go ahead and submit this bill for approval, and that can launch off whatever approval process I might have. We can set up pretty complex approval processes. One thing that actually might tie back into AI directions is What if your approval process needs to be based off of this service location, right? So you have a site manager or something like that, and you want to make sure that all of the different site managers that are associated with these different sites are able to approve those bills. That's something that we can absolutely do with our approval automation solution. We're able to even send out approval emails. So those emails can be delivered to those users, especially in a use case like this, where that site manager, I'm going to use that and kind of pick on that example here for a second. They might not be in NetSuite on their day-to-day job. They're out running the plant, they're out managing the warehouse, they're out doing whatever they need to do, but you still want to keep them informed. You still want to make sure that these services are legitimate and actually for your business and for their particular locations. So we can actually send them an email. They'll be able to easily review that email, something that would look like this, see all the coding information, see what was coded to their location. They can even review a PDF copy of the invoice that'll be attached automatically to the email. So they can do all of that. They don't need access to NetSuite to approve this. They can easily just go ahead and approve that directly from the email, provide a comment if they'd like to, and send that back into the system. We'll capture all of those approval steps, all of that approval history on the record here as it happens. So you'll have that audit trail, again, highlighting the efficiencies and the benefit of a single system of record. All that's captured inside of NetSuite, and you're going to be able to see it, have this bill post as soon as the approval process is finished, whether that's one step like my demo account, or if you have a more complex approval process, we can handle those multi-step approval processes too. From there, you can go ahead and leverage sending this bill for payment. We do have payment automation as well that can help with automating some of those payment pain points if necessary. So that's just a little bit of some running through some examples and highlighting some of the benefits and use cases that we've seen. Again, some common ones that have come up with some of our customer base. Just kind of wanted to walk you through them, let you see how they could actually operate inside of NetSuite. With that, we'll go ahead and jump back over to our PowerPoint here and wrap up with a couple key takeaways.
Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate the demo. So for our takeaways here, really what we want to leave you with are these points. So AI directions are just common language directions. If your finance team can describe it to a coworker, you can probably write a direction for it. You don't need to reach out to your IT team anymore. If that data that you need to have coded inside of NetSuite is on the PDF, there's probably a direction we can help you write for it. And then, one direction is really going to be a permanent go forward fix, not just that one-time patch you did to, help automate things this time or this week. That is a permanent go forward solution for you. And really what you want to be asking yourself is, do we have these manual workarounds right now? If so, that's a signal that maybe you should start looking into our AI directions and really see how we can help automate things for you. So really, I want to share something with you before we wrap up today's session. Here is a link to our latest guide that's available for you to scan. The guide walks you through real prompts that chartered customers have used, they're using today to eliminate some of these manual processes and help them really automatically code these things in NetSuite. It's a great starting point if you want to start thinking about where to begin with AI directions in your own workflow, in your own environment. And if you wanted to share some concrete examples with your team after today's session, this is a great way to do it. And then coming up, we have another webinar in our series on AI Masterclass. So as we wrap things up, I just want to let you know that this is coming up. In this coming webinar, we're going to talk about touchless invoice processing, the ability to move invoices from receipt to bill creation with zero human interaction. Really leveraging our Invoice AI and our AI directions and some other features to skip any of that manual processing. So we've got the registration link in the chat, so grab it and share it with anyone on your team, and we look forward to seeing you on that next webinar. And then I think we'll finally, finish things up with a few questions. There are a few that weren't able to answer in the chat really quick. So Mike, I don't know if you want to help me dive into some of these questions
Yeah,
and get some of them answered.
let's do it.
So how about the first one we have in the list? Is the custom field extraction doing all the work, not what you type in the AI directions box, or do you need to type something in both fields for that to kick in?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that top AI direction box, that is actually for like general context that you can provide to AI when it's extracting the invoice. I'll say most of the time, you're probably not going to use it. So you definitely don't need to have something in the top box as well as a custom field extraction. Most of the time, you're probably only going to need something in the custom field extraction boxes. There can be some edge cases where providing some additional like high level context. If you're familiar with kind of the idea of how you work with AI, like a system prompt, like this is something you should always remember. Those are the kind of things that go in that general AI direction box. But I would say across the board, you're probably going to focus most of your use cases on custom field extractions, and you don't necessarily need to have something in both for a direction to work.
Thanks. Another one we have that I think would be good to answer is, can these AI directions be layered or prioritized? And then another one I think I saw was, what order do those rules fire in if you have multiples in the system that apply?
Yeah, so it's all going to be based off of the keywords that trigger. So if we see this text on a particular invoice, then that's going to trigger potentially one or multiple directions. So again, that's all context that's being given to the AI essentially at the same time. So if you have multiple directions that apply, then both of those pieces of information are going to be part of AI trying to determine what's returned. So there's not really a level of priority that's built in. If possible, that's where keywords can be helpful, right? If you have two directions that contradict each other, and I've seen people do that from time to time, things can get confused. Something that I would just like highlight is that I can't sit here and tell you like perfectly how any AI direction is going to operate. That's one of kind of the fun things of how we all operate or how we're all like learning AI. This is something where sometimes you just have to go test something. But in general, if you have two AI directions that contradict each other, it's going to depend. The AI is probably going to figure out like what give it more context. Like what do you think I want to do given these two contradictory kind of set of instructions that you're giving me.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. I don't think we've got time for a couple more. Is it better to have a lengthy, compounded, i.e., more words per paragraph AI direction, or several smaller AI directions that would kind of work together? Whether that's multiple field extractions within a single rule or more direction. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say typically it's probably better to keep your directions shorter as possible. So this might be a good use case if you ask this question or you're curious, like maybe it'd be helpful to review some of the specific examples that you're thinking through with your CSM, your customer success manager, and maybe they can point you in the right direction. Otherwise, go the direction of support. The biggest mistake that I see when people start to make directions too long is they're trying to build that logic into the direction. So you're trying to say things like, if you see this department or if you see this location, I want you to populate this department. If you see this, blah, 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 I want you to populate that. And they're building a lot of logic that might be unnecessary, right? So you want to keep your direction focused on this is in that like location example that I gave, right? We want to keep our direction focused on this is the text that you should see on the invoice, and that's what's going to help you to determine what location to populate. So as a general rule, I would say try to keep your directions smaller. And if there's multiple use cases, probably split them up into separate directions with separate keywords, separate triggering keywords. If you do have an instance where there's multiple things that apply to a single vendor, I would definitely have multiple custom extraction rules like on that same or direction, sorry, multiple custom directions on that same overall direction. I wouldn't split those up, but yeah, try to keep things brief and focused if you can.
Excellent. And then I think we probably have time for one more question. can we use AI directions to populate fields that are missing, say, from a PO for a PO backed bill, but you still need populated, something like an amortization date field?
I'm trying to think what the use case there. Can you repeat the question one more time, Matt, for me?
Yeah, the question says, can I use AI directions to populate fields that are missing from the PO, but still need populating? As an example, amortization dates.
Interesting. Yeah, so there's some instances there. That particular use case, there's some logic of what NetSuite expects to be on the PO versus what they expect our solution to populate. So I'd have to kind of look at that one in a little bit more detail before I want to answer 100% what would be driven by the PO in that use case, because amortization dates can show up on the invoice. I'm sorry, on the PO itself, and typically we would just probably carry those over from the PO. So it kind of, that's a it depends answer. So sorry not to fully answer the question there for you,
You're
but
good.
follow back up with support on that one if you are running into some scenarios where you want a little bit more detailed answer there, and I'm sure we can help you there.
Yeah. And then let's end on one last one. How do I grant access to AI settings or AI directions for other roles?
That's a good question. I know we're at time, but let me just quickly show it. We'll just jump back over to NetSuite here. This does require the administrator role to grant the permission, so just keep that in mind. A user with the administrator role would come in to our settings. They can access that by going to the gear icon here in the upper right-hand corner. They're able to access our permissions tab right here. These permissions can control a lot of different pieces of our solution, right? So you'll see a lot of things in my list. Your list may look different depending upon what you're using inside of our Suite app. This one right here, manage AI directions, that's what you can grant to either particular roles or at the employee level that will give them access to this manage AI directions tab. So you just come in here, pick the roles that you wanted to be able to create AI directions, submit that, and then make sure you submit here again before it'll save that. And those users would then be able to kind of self-serve and self-create their own directions.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you everyone for attending today. We really do appreciate it and look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.